Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Month. I'm Jack, and today we are starting on the Star Wars prequel trilogy with Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Following the enormous success of the original trilogy, there was a lot of talk about whether or not there would be any prequels. Then in the late 90s, it was eventually announced that a prequel trilogy was in the works, and the first one was coming out in 1999. Fans were so excited to finally return to the galaxy far, far away that they fell in love with all those years ago. And some of the fans actually said that they liked the film, but as time went on, they quickly came out to say that they didn't really like it. And over time, this film and its two sequels have become the most hated prequel trilogy of all time by far. Pretty much everybody has made fun of these movies. While there are still some fans of the prequels out there, the general consensus is that they're bad and very disappointing when compared to the original three. I have an interesting history with these movies. When I was little, I actually really liked these films. In fact, I actually liked them better than the originals. Don't worry, I don't think that anymore. In fact, when I was little, The Phantom Menace was my favorite. I liked Darth Maul, I liked the lightsaber battles, I loved the pod racing, but as time has gone on, yeah, I've come to see that this is a very disappointing film. While I still do think that there are some good aspects to this film, overall, it really doesn't work. Obi-Wan Kenobi and his master Qui-Gon Jinn are on a mission to save Queen Amidala of the planet of Naboo from the evil Galactic Trade Federation. So what is their plan? Well, they want her to sign a treaty. Okay then. However, their ship is damaged and they end up being stranded on the planet of Tatooine. And who do they come across there? None other than young Anakin Skywalker. When I was a kid, while I did still like the original trilogy, the reason I liked the prequels more was simply because there was more lightsabers. Yeah, that was the big reason. The originals, they used more blasters and stuff, and the lightsabers only come out once in a while. Yes, I was mainly into the action, and I never thought about things like characters and story and dialogue, because the prequels really fail at that kind of stuff. One of the biggest issues with particularly The Phantom Menace is that the characters are just not human. They just come off as lifeless robots for most of it, who show occasional signs of learning to be human. Let's start out with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, Obi-Wan Kenobi definitely should have been the main Jedi character of this movie, but it really feels like Qui-Gon is the main Jedi. Obi-Wan just feels like a sidekick. Besides Palpatine, the droids, and I guess Anakin, Obi-Wan is the only character that we know from the original trilogy. And they really should have focused mainly on him and his relationship with Anakin. Even when I was little, I couldn't really get that much of a grasp on his character at the beginning of the film. He and Qui-Gon seemed almost exactly the same. Now, later in the movie, we do see a little bit more of a character to him. He does have a couple of nice scenes with Qui-Gon near the end of the film, but that isn't really enough. He just sort of swings his lightsaber around in the first act, and then once they land on Tatooine, he spends most of his time on the ship. On top of that, this is one of the many times where the prequels do the opposite of what was said in the original trilogy. For example, in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan talks to Luke about how he noticed just how strong the Force was in Anakin, and so he personally took it upon himself to train him. But here, he seems against training Anakin due to the fact that the rest of the Jedi Council believe that he's too old, and they also sense fear in him. And Qui-Gon is the one who wants to train Anakin. Their characters are completely reversed. Obi-Wan should have been the one who wanted to train Anakin, and Qui-Gon should have been the one telling him that he couldn't. Like a lot of the characters in this movie, Qui-Gon Jinn does have some nice moments that do show a little bit of human emotion in him, particularly the scenes between him, Anakin, and Obi-Wan. There's just not that sense of emotion that was there with the characters of the original trilogy. Queen Amidala. Where do I start? Queen Amidala literally sounds like a computer when she's talking. Now granted, when she's pretending to be a handmaiden, she actually feels more like a human being. But when she's the queen, she just turns into a robot. Is it part of her duty to show no emotion? Again, there's an idea for a good character here. She is strong, like Princess Leia was in the original trilogy, but again, there's not that emotion in her that makes her relatable. Finally, there's Anakin Skywalker. Now, truth be told, Anakin Skywalker Skywalker is written well. He's a likable young boy who just wants to help people. This movie certainly did do a good job of showing the good side of Anakin Skywalker, which is something that the next film definitely failed miserably at doing. The big problem with him is Jake Lloyd, the kid that they cast to play him. As everybody has said, he's just not good in this role. His performance is, well, wooden. The best way I can describe most of the main characters of the movie is that they all have potential to be great characters, but there had to be more emotion in them to make them more relatable to the audience, with the exception of one character. Jar Jar Binks. Yes, as everybody has said, Jar Jar Binks is just obnoxious. Yes, he is the one character in this movie that does have a real personality, but it's not exactly a good personality. He's just a big dumbass who just doesn't know jack shit. He talks in a way that makes you want to cut your ears off, and he barely contributes anything to the story other than taking the Jedi down to the Gungan city and accidentally killing a couple droids during the final battle. C-3PO might have been a bit of a fool in the original trilogy, but there was still more to his character other than him just being stupid and clumsy. But heroes are only as good as their villains. We have the return of the Emperor from the original, who we learn is actually named Palpatine, or his Sith alias, Darth Sidious. Ian McDiarmid returns to play him, and despite him being older, he nonetheless does do a very good job. It's nice that we actually get to see a different side of his character. He isn't just an evil villain. He can actually be very charming and manipulative. He does a good job of coming off as friendly and rather trustworthy, but still having a small twinge of darkness in him. And I will say I did think it was kind of stupid that they built this up as a big twist, that he is the Sith Lord, when it so obviously was him all along. I mean, really, he sounds exactly like the Emperor, except being friendly. It was really kind of silly that George Lucas seemingly thought that we wouldn't know that it was him. But unfortunately, his character gets somewhat sidelined, because we now have to talk about the Trade Federation guys. These guys are terrible. I have no idea what George Lucas was thinking when he came up with these characters. You honestly expect us to be threatened by these guys? Oh yeah, they're totally villain types, aren't they? Besides being totally offensive to Asian people, and the puppet work just being god-awful. There's nothing interesting or threatening about these characters. They're just goofy. These are easily the worst Star Wars villains ever. And their big evil scheme about making Queen Amidala sign a treaty is just not engaging or interesting in any way. Whatever happened to an evil empire creating space stations to destroy entire planets? That was a legitimate threat that needed to be stopped and had you engaged in the story from beginning to end. Even when I was a kid, I was very confused by what they were fighting for. I didn't care, of course, because the action was so cool, but now that I'm older, I recognize that story comes first. But then we get easily the best part of this movie, Darth Maul. Yes, just about everybody's favorite part of this movie is Darth Maul. And it's easy to see why, because he's an awesome character. He has a really cool design with his horns and his tattoos all over his face. And he actually comes off as a formidable threat. He's a worthy match for the Jedi and is good at acrobatic skills as well as the Force. But again, I, like everybody else, was so pissed off that they totally wasted him in this film. Almost all the scenes with him, with the exception of the final lightsaber battle, are like 20 seconds long. Oh no, this is too much of a good character. Let's go back to Jar Jar Binks. Oh yeah, because we all really like his character. Yeah, why do we get hundreds of endless scenes with Jar Jar Binks in it, but only like 5 20-second long scenes with Darth Maul in it? One of the biggest problems with the prequels, I think, is just the amount of different villains in them. The original trilogy, and so far the new trilogy, kept it simple. We have one prominent villain throughout the trilogy that gets a lot of focus, and one mysterious evil master controlling him. The original trilogy had Darth Vader and the Emperor, and the new trilogy has Kylo Ren and Supreme Leader Snoke. The prequels did have an evil master in the form of the Emperor again, but then we had multiple different henchmen for him. First we had Darth Maul, then we had Count Dooku, and then we had General Grievous. And again, those horrible Trade Federation guys. Instead of just having one prominent henchman who got a lot of focus and character, we instead have 3 that don't get that much at all. Darth Maul definitely should have been the main henchman. He's far cooler than both Dooku and Grievous, and just had the most potential to be awesome. But George Lucas never listened to any of his fans and didn't bring him back. It wasn't until the Clone Wars TV series, when George Lucas was out of the picture, that they brought Darth Maul back. So yeah, that just shows how much George Lucas listens to his fans. The stormtroopers in the original trilogy may have been a bit silly at times, but the battle droids of the prequels make the stormtroopers look like warriors in comparison. These battle droids absolutely suck. The stormtroopers did have a somewhat formidable design to them. Okay, you could argue it was a little bit goofy, but the battle droids, as I've said before, they literally look like walking toothpicks. What the heck is threatening about that? Oh, but that's not all. The stormtroopers had normal, but threatening voices. The battle droids have these stupid high-pitched voices that sound like a bunch of little kids pretending to be soldiers. I will say that the more the prequels went, the more pathetic the battle droids became, though they suck in pretty much every single one. I will say this, the Clone Wars TV show made them even worse by adding so much dumb comic relief to them that they're about as threatening as a toddler. But even if we're just talking about the Phantom Menace, they still absolutely suck. They pose no threat at all. In the original trilogy, the stormtroopers constantly beat our heroes. They had them running for their lives, and our heroes actually seemed somewhat concerned about it. Here, the Jedi just cut through them like they're nothing. They're totally invincible superheroes, so you don't worry about them at all. Now granted, there are the destroyer droids. Now those guys are cool. They have energy shields, and they actually do have the Jedis running at some points, even though the Jedi don't really seem that concerned because, again, they're lifeless robots. But they do nonetheless pose an actual threat. Why didn't the Trade Federation just make an army of these guys? Some people do defend the prequels by saying that at least the action is cool, but with the exception of a couple scenes, mainly some of the lightsaber battles, the action in these movies is boring. As I said before, the stuff with the Jedi and the battle droids is just lame because you know that the Jedi are going to win and they never get so much as an injury. Now another big criticism that the prequels get is that there is way too much CGI. And while I definitely agree with that, I would have to defend the Phantom Menace as it does still use a good deal of real sets. Yes, the CGI is still overused and a lot of it looks very dated, but I nonetheless applaud the practical imagery that was used, mainly just because so little of it was used in the next two prequels. Episodes 2 and 3 went way too far with the CGI. But nonetheless, a lot of these planets are very interesting. Naboo is a very beautiful looking planet, and while we do return to Tatooine, we do get to see a little bit more of it. My absolute favorite though is Coruscant. It's just such a cool idea, an entire planet that is just a giant city. There are some really cool shots flying around and exploring the city. I'm glad that we get to see even more of it in the next film. But of course, we have to talk about the story of this film. It's very poorly done. There's just no formidable threat in the Trade Federation. It doesn't feel like there's that much of a reason for us to care about these characters and their journey. They're just on their way to talk with the Senate, and they just happen to run into Anakin along the way. When you look back at the original trilogy, you have a group of rebels trying to destroy the ultimate weapon of the Empire. You have Luke Skywalker learning how to be a Jedi from Yoda. You have Luke Skywalker trying to convert his father back to the good side. The stories of the original trilogy are engaging because there are clear heroes and clear villains. Whenever they bring up the fact that Queen Amidala has to sign the treaty, I always just groan, like, seriously? That's how high the stakes are here? The scenes on Tatooine drag for a really long time. Again, there's just no sense of tension or anything. We don't really see what the Trade Federation is doing to the people on Naboo. We hear things like, oh, the people are dying. Well, why don't you show us that then? The stuff on Tatooine just goes on for way too long, and we're just waiting for that pod race to start. And then once we get to Coruscant, as everybody has said, it is scene after scene of characters just talking. When I was a kid, the way that I would keep myself entertained during these scenes was count the amount of steps the characters took. I'm not even joking. When you look back on the original trilogy, everything is always moving, and even when there is dialogue scenes, it's interesting and it keeps you engaged. Here they talk about things like politics, which nobody wants to see in a Star Wars movie. The Senate meeting scene is agonizing to sit through. Then we finally leave and get to the climax on Naboo. Here we have Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon versus Darth Maul, Queen Amidala and her soldiers trying to capture the Viceroy of the Trade Federation, the Gungans battling the droids, and Anakin, who's engaged in a space battle. And one that I think could have especially been eliminated was the Gungan battle. The Gungans could have easily just been with Queen Amidala and her soldiers trying to capture the Viceroy. We never built any connections with any of these Gungans. And don't tell me that we did with Jar Jar. The only thing that we ever think of with him is just how enjoyable it would be to punch him in the face. How are these action scenes? Well, the ones with Queen Amidala are boring because, again, battle droids. The one in space with Anakin is a little bit more entertaining, though I don't like the fact how that Anakin just accidentally saves the day. He should have gone up to the blockade intentionally, knowing that it was controlling the droids with the intention of shutting them down. That would have made him far more heroic. Finally, we get to the Darth Maul battle, and this is definitely one of the biggest highlights of this movie. It's very visually stunning, and there is a good combination of both lightsabers clashing, but also some physical action, and John Williams' Duel of the Fates just makes the scene even more exciting. The only issue here is that it is very choreographed. It doesn't have that emotion that the duels between Vader and Luke did in the original trilogy. At times it does feel a little bit like a dance. Despite this though, it's still a fun scene. For all of this film's problems, it does have some saving graces. When the characters are allowed to show emotions and be human, it's very good. The scene where Anakin says goodbye to his mother is a genuinely sad moment, and one of the only times in the film where I actually thought Jake Lloyd did a good job. Those little scenes between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan at the end, where they actually show a strong bond, did make me feel a little bit sad when Qui-Gon dies at the end. The pod race is a scene that some people complain about for being too long, but for me, I think it's very well done. It's very visually impressive, the effects for the most part hold up very well today, and the sound design. Oh my god, the sound design. It's so great. Every single pod has its own sound, showing all the different engines that the pod racers use. It's a really exciting scene, and for the most part there's no music until at the very end when things get really tense. John Williams gives another fantastic score. The Duel of the Fates theme is just incredible. It's easily one of the best pieces of music that he's ever written. Seriously, who doesn't know and love that piece of music? The film is certainly watchable. You can sit down and watch the movie, and while you will certainly cringe in several areas, there are still some enjoyable aspects in it. I can easily see why this movie and the other two prequels are so hated. They really don't at all live up to the original trilogy. I don't think they would get so much flack if they weren't the prequels to three of the greatest and most important films out there. The Phantom Menace is very disappointing, and I think we were all expecting something much better. But if you do like The Phantom Menace or any of the other prequels, that's totally cool. But for me and most other people, these films were just not what we wanted. I give The Phantom Menace 5 out of 10. So that's my review of The Phantom Menace, and hopefully with the next Star Wars prequel, things will improve. Shit.